The subject matter or title of the talk that I have been given tonight is, what must Pakatan Rakyat, more so PKR, do from now on to win the coming general elections? I would like to rephrase that title or change it slightly and rather call it, what must Pakatan Rakyat, in particular PKR, do not to lose the next general election? I would say the next general election is not for PKR to win or Pakatan Rakyat to win, but more for UMNO to lose. When I say UMNO, of course, we mean Barisan Nasional. But Barisan Nasional minus UMNO is nothing, especially in Peninsular Malaysia. In East Malaysia, maybe UMNO's presence in, Sarawak is hardly anything, and in Sabah, less than half of the total number of seats. But in Peninsular Malaysia, when we talk about Barisan Nasional, then we're talking about UMNO. So the issue is not how to defeat Barisan Nasional, at least as far as West Malaysia is concerned, but how to defeat UMNO. And it's not a matter of how Pakatan Rakyat is going to win, but how are we going to ensure that UMNO loses. And if UMNO loses, of course, Barisan Nasional will lose. And when Barisan Nasional loses, then by default, Pakatan Rakyat is going to win the next election. Now this has been a subject matter which was discussed way back in 2001, 2002. We're talking about 9 years ago. Now, at that time, a 3-day seminar was held in Malacca. And the purpose of the seminar is exactly what I'm talking about today. How to make sure that Barisan Nasional loses the next election. Now we have to remember, this seminar was held against the backdrop of the 99 general elections, where 2 states fell, Kelantan and Terengganu. And Kedah, out of 15 parliament seats, 8 fell to the opposition. UMNO or Barisan Nasional retained only 7, less than half. And in the Kedah State Assembly, Barisan Nasional was ruling without its 2/3 majority. During the Lunas by-election exactly 1 year later, the seat fell to the opposition and Barisan lost its 2/3 majority in the Kedah State Assembly. That was probably the best performance since 1969. The 1969 elections 30 years earlier, which triggered the race riots, the infamous race riots known as May 13. And it was 30 years on, 1999, before we saw an almost repeat of what happened in 99. Now, the question that we asked then, how would the next general elections look like, which was expected at the very latest 2004. Now back in 2001, 2002, we're talking 9-10 years ago, we already sat down to discuss how to make sure not only for the opposition to win, but to make sure that the ruling party loses. Because the sentiments for the opposition was very high. So the opposition didn't need to do really too much. They just had to make sure that by default, Barisan loses so that the opposition can form the next government. Now, one thing that was agreed during the 3-day convention, the success of 99 was the Mahathir hate factor. People were united because of the hate for Dr. Mahathir. Now what happens? The seminar discussed. What happens if just before the next election, Dr. Mahathir resigns and hands over the government to Abdullah Badawi? There will no longer be a Mahathir hate factor. And instead, there'll be a honeymoon period. And if Abdullah Badawi is smart, within a few months of taking over, he calls for a snap election. And he will certainly come out with a landslide victory. There'll be no Mahathir hate factor. There'll be the Abdullah Badawi honeymoon period. And that is almost a recipe for success for Barisan Nasional. Now, what would the opposition do if such a thing happens? It was discussed, it was agreed, the problem was identified, but no solution was arrived at. Everyone agreed that 99 was because of the hate Mahathir factor. If Mahathir was to resign and Abdullah Badawi takes over, and Abdullah Badawi calls for a general election soon after taking over, the opposition is in deep trouble. And it happened exactly like how it was forecasted, exactly like how it was anticipated. It happened, and 2004, barely a few months after Abdullah Badawi took over as Prime Minister, he called for the election, and it was the best performance ever for Barisan Nasional. Today, we are deliberating on exactly the same thing. 2008 was a political tsunami. It was not a Mahathir hate factor. It was an UMNO hate factor. Abu. Anything but UMNO. Asal bukan UMNO. That was what united the people. And the people didn't care who you placed as candidates. As long as it's not UMNO, as long as it's not Barisan Nasional, as long as it's opposition, the people will vote. I remember the voters telling me, jokingly of course, put a monkey or a donkey and we will still vote for them, as long as not UMNO, asal bukan UMNO. But that has changed. The sentiments of 2008 is no longer with the people. Yes, the people do want UMNO out. They do want Barisan Nasional out. But they're not prepared, as what they said back in 2008. Put a donkey or a monkey and we shall still vote as long as it's opposition. Now, the people's demands and expectations are much higher. They expect more and better from the people they vote for. I think to a certain extent it is the opposition's own fault. The opposition has disappointed the people since 2008. In terms of performance, yes, that can be argued. There's a lot of things state governments cannot do without the support, without the approval of the federal government. And there's many instances where the federal government is even sabotaging the states to make sure that the state cannot perform. The people are to a certain extent quite prepared to forgive some of the shortcomings of the state governments, at least those where the federal government has a say. But in matters where the federal government has no say, in matters where it is absolutely the power of the state government, the people are not quite prepared to accept the excuse that the state cannot perform because of the federal government. It has nothing to do with the federal government. Now, the people are very clear. They are voting against Barisan Nasional, against UMNO, against the ruling party because they want change. But if they're going to vote for a new government, and if there's going to be no change, no difference, then why vote for a new government if you're not voting for change? Basically, change is what the people expect to see. And the people no longer want to accept mere rhetoric. Change must be proven. The proof of the pudding is in the eating, as Bush would say. And there's been a lot of disappointments which the people have faced these last 3 years since 2008. It is time that political parties and politicians wise up and not take the people for granted. The people refuse to be taken for granted. The people refuse to be used by the politicians merely as a tool to get into power. The people vote for their representatives, their Wakil Rakyat, so that these Wakil Rakyat can go to the State Assembly or to Parliament and bring about the changes which they clamor. This Pakatan Rakyat, in particular PKR, has got to understand. In 2008, we gave people the taste of blood. And any animal, once it has tasted blood, it always wants blood. The people know that they have the power of the vote. And they know that their one vote is very crucial. They are not going to give this vote easily. Not any longer. You have to fight for their vote. You have to work hard for their vote. No longer can you go to the people once every 5 years, make promises, and expect the people to be fooled like how they used to in the past. Pakatan Rakyat has got to go down to the people and convince the people that it is going to deliver on all its promises. Many people are skeptical that Pakatan Rakyat is merely another political party, no different from Barisan Nasional. Barisan Nasional talks, Pakatan Rakyat talks. We have to show the people that Barisan Nasional talks, but Pakatan Rakyat works. That's the difference between the existing government and the new government which we are asking the people to vote for. Feel the pulse of the people. The people are beginning to get restless. You might say that we are propagating a third force. What we are trying to tell the politicians, no, we are not propagating the third force. The third force is already here. And the third force is the people, the Rakyat. This third force is going to be the kingmaker. This third force is going to decide who gets to run this country. Listen to them, because they are saying certain things which you are not listening to. And if you don't listen to them, they will punish you come the next election. That's all I can say. As for the formula on how Pakatan Rakyat should not lose the next election, as they say, at least the popular saying amongst the army, a soldier dies for his nation. I say a soldier should not die for his nation. A soldier should make the other bastard die for his nation. And that's what we should do, we from the opposition. We should make Barisan lose, because when they lose, then we win. And the only way we can do that is to go back to the people and convince the people that we are going to be that better government. Unfortunately, the people are not quite convinced, not fully convinced. And the feedback that we get, many of the people who voted Pakatan in the last election are either going to swing back to Barisan Nasional or are going to boycott the elections and will be refusing to vote in the next election.